Albany Pine Bush Preserve Commission's quarterly board meeting. My name's Keith Gertz. I'm the Regional Director for DEC's Region 4, and I also serve as the board chair. As is customary, the first thing I like to do is go around the table and introduce the Executive Director and the rest of the board members. So to my left is Executive Director Chris Hauver. Going around the table is Jessica Otney, representing the Nature Conservancy. And then there's Mike McLaughlin, representing Albany County. And then Harvey Alexander, citizen member. Stephen Rice, citizen member. Nancy Pearson, citizen member. And going around the table is Chris Spencer, representing City of Albany. Don Sapos, representing Guideline. And we have Supervisor Paul Mahar, representing Colony. Welcome, everybody. The first order of business is to consider the minutes from the meeting in December. Can I get a motion to consider those minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. Now we will open the floor to the public. If there's anybody in the public who would like to speak. Robert?
This is the first chance to say hi. I put our annual report from last year on the table, so you can look at it later. Wanted to mention that we had said that we created a match with the 2016 call. So that's all done. The donations are going well. The people seem to pick one or the other. I think with the new tax law, we're not sure if it's going to mean anything to a lot of people, but we did it. 536 children we brought from the Ticket to Ride program who are lower income, so we're always proud of that and looking for money. We budgeted $3,000 a year and we didn't actually spend it all this year, so it all depends on how many people apply. One other thing I wanted to point out on the budget, on the money, which is page 2. You look at all those things, and the one thing that's a little hard to understand is the land money. So that's restricted money. We have to look at that and say, well, we can't count that as something we're going to be able to use next year. So we want to have a fund balance of 6 to 12 months. And once you subtract that, we're doing pretty well. We'd like to use down our money kind of gradually till we get to about 6 months. But if we can increase our donations, we'd like to make that difficult. So our free cash flow last year was about $383, so we actually gained some money. And one other thing I'm happy about was that we did purchase upgraded Microsoft software for the entire staff, saving the Pine Bush $21,000 last year. So, thank you.
Is there anybody else from the public who would like to say a few words? Make a few comments? Okay, we'll move forward. One thing that I would like to report is that the DEC is closed on a few properties that have been held by the Nature Conservancy for a significant amount of time. Two of those properties we have actually closed on with the purchase, and the third is under contract, and we expect to close on that this year. And the only other thing I wanted to report was that the department has been collaborating with the Albany Pine Bush staff on management of the Crossgates Hill Carner Blue Butterfly Mitigation Site. The commission will be officially named as a designee of the department and will be conducting habitat restoration work as per the updated nearly completed management plan. And that's all I have. So I'd like to open it up to the board members. Board members have anything they would like to announce or comment on? Okay, so we'll move over to Chris.
Okay, so since Jessica Otney Mahar didn't want to mention it, she and another person, John Bartow, who's a long-term colleague, have an op-ed in today's Times Union about a proposal that's in the Assembly right now, and you don't have to say anything about it. But
It's not in the Assembly, as a matter of fact.
I'm sorry, it's in the Senate. It's not. I was going to say the legislature. It's in the Senate and proposed by the government, but it's not in the Assembly yet.
Yes.
So if you're interested, I'll pass this around. You don't have to say anything about it.
There's more information at nature.org/unfairforest.
but I thought it was important enough to
Thank you.
I sent her a message this morning at about 6 o'clock. So for my report, just a couple of things. Last evening, we had the 3rd annual fundraiser for the Rapp Road Historical Association. That was here, that was well attended, it was very nice. We had a number of folks here, much more important than myself. We had the mayor here, we had Assemblywoman Fahey here, former Assemblyman Jack McEnany was here. J.D. Lorenzo, the executive director of the Preservation League of New York, was here to receive an award, which was really nice. Preservation League identified the Rapp Road community as one of the top 7 to save. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, which is a really big, it's a big designation to get that. It's statewide, and they recently put up an historic marker on there in the community. You know, those state markers, which was yet another feather in their cap, and it was a nice event. It always is. So just wanted to mention that. Upcoming here for us in the Pine Bush, we have Earth Day. Earth Day, the real Earth Day, is Sunday the 22nd. We're celebrating it here on Saturday as we usually do. This is the new program guide. I have the page folded down. It's Saturday the 21st from 9 to 12, being spearheaded by, I believe, both Jesse and Jackie, right, Jesse? Okay. And I want to make sure that I thank the Friends for helping support that too. They're helping support t-shirts, and we're giving t-shirts and lunch for everybody who volunteers. So if you want a t-shirt, you want free lunch, you got to come out and work from 9 to 12. And it's usually a very, very well-attended event, weather dependent. If it rains, we'll get 50 people. If it's sunny, we'll get 300. So we're looking for some sun. Again, what else is coming up? June 2nd. Saturday, June 2nd is our Lupin Fest this year. That's also in the guide. I have that folded down. You can take a look. I'll pass this around. Lupin Fest this year is 2 weeks later. It's usually the week prior to or 2 weeks prior to Memorial Day, but looking at staff schedules, we wanted to maximize getting people here, our staff here. So we moved it to June 2nd. Jackie Citroniti is spearheading the project this year. We always have a staff lead, so she's taking that on. We have a whole lot of programs going on like we usually do, walks, talks. We have music. We will have B95.5, the radio station here, doing a live remote with, of course, their bee mascot, and we use that we tie that into our pollinators initiative. So, and then there'll be food vendors, there'll be craft vendors, and we'll have wild animals, or live wildlife. Live animals. If we have live like that, you know what I mean. You know what I mean. That was really smooth. So
It's good that they're alive.
So there'll be live animal demonstrations for the Lupin Fest. Okay. I won't. At the expense of probably stumbling through more things, I won't go through the update that's in your board packet. The quarterly update, I'd ask you to please take a look at that for all the things that the staff have been up to for the last quarter. There's a lot of good things going on as usual. And I just wanted to reiterate one thing for the Friends with the annual report that Richard mentioned. You know, the Friends are a great supporter of all the things that we do. And this Ticket to Ride program is really an important thing. 536 kids that would not have probably taken any field trip whatsoever. But actually we're able to take a field trip here to the Pine Bush. The Friends were able to pay for that transportation, and the Pine Bush Commission waives the program fees for those students. So it's really a worthy program. And if you're not a member of the Friends group, so you didn't do it, but I will.
Thank you.
If you're not a member of the Friends, please consider that. Or you don't even have to become a member, you can just donate. Because even $5 goes a long way. $5 will sponsor one kid. So that's not a lot of money. And in June, at the June meeting, right, Wendy, we're going to have that website done. So the staff continues to work on updating the website. It'll be really easy to donate. So at the June meeting, if you haven't yet, I'm going to say please consider joining the Friends or making a donation. That's it.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Next, we have Neil Gifford with a report from the technical.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Here is the quarterly technical committee summary, which is brief because project review has been slow, so the committee hasn't met. So there are a number of projects that are continuing to be reviewed by each of the municipalities, and the status of those projects is summarized here. And I guess the only one really of note is the landfill habitat mitigation project. Continues. We have the annual interagency habitat management meeting here scheduled in a couple of weeks with Fish and Wildlife Service, DEC, Army Corps of Engineers to continue to evaluate and look at what's going to happen this year. But things are going really well. The city has submitted an application for a wetland permit modification to the Army Corps of Engineers to get the sand that's stockpiled on Rapp Road up onto the landfill. There's a small, it's actually a ditch that they have to cross, and that wasn't addressed in their earlier permit, so they're modifying and requesting a modification of that permit, which is expected. They expect to get, so they can get the sand from where it is up onto the landfill without having to drive on Rapp Road itself. So outside of that, the summary kind of speaks for itself. It's all the same projects from last quarter. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Having none. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Next, we have Lisa Anthony with the financial report.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, the first financial report, statement of activities. This represents our figures year-to-date through January 31st, which is 10 months of our fiscal year. On the revenue side, dues and contributions are very, very close to budget. Government grant income is slightly under budget, and this should catch up over February and March. Mitigation fees are 106% of budget, but this may come in under budget for the year due to decreased tonnage from the landfill. Lease revenue is on budget for the year, and other revenue is $8,000 higher than budget. This is due to an increase in merchandise sales. So overall, our budget came in at 98% of our revenue for the month of January. Moving on to expenses, personnel and fringe are slightly over budget. This is due to a large benefit payment that we make in November for the retirement system, and this will catch up February and March as well. Travel and training is under budget, and this is due to some training that we didn't spend over quite a few departments this year. It will be under for the year, but we have reallocated that expense to line down below, which is our supplies and equipment, and a couple other categories here. Contractual is 87% of budget, and this should be on budget for the year, slightly over. Communications and occupancy, both are on budget through the month of January, and supplies and equipment are under budget in all departments at 68%. But like I said before, we are reallocating some of the money that we're not spending in travel and training to supplies and equipment. All other expenses are slightly under budget for the year due to savings in insurance, and we ended up at 94% of budget for expenses, 98% for revenue. So a slightly higher net income of $181,000. Any questions on? Okay, moving on to statement of net assets. Cash decreased due to an increase in spending and also a transfer of excess cash into our reserves. Our conservation and land reserves remained the same. Grants receivables increased due to money owed from DEC from October through December, and this has been paid. Accounts receivable decreased, and this is just due to the decrease of mitigation funds owed in the last quarter. Inventory decreased slightly. Prepaid expenses decreased, and this is due to the timing of year-end expenses, and this will happen in March and April. Investments increased $633,000. This is due to a positive performance in all three funds of $333,000 and a transfer from cash of $300,000. Capital assets increased due to septic work at the Barron's House and Tell Me a Story exhibit. Deferred outflows decreased $377,000. This is a new number from this year, and it's been consistent throughout the year. This is due to a GASB report that we get from the New York State Retirement System once a year. So you'll see this change once a year. And it's an actuarial calculation, and it's based on all of the figures that they put together, and they give them to me once a year in August, and I record them in November. So total assets increased $203,000 over last year due to an increase in receivables and investments. Under liabilities, accounts payable and accrued expenses, it decreased slightly due to the repayment of bonds and rent. Deferred revenue remained the same, and the New York State pension liability. This is also a GASB calculation that will change once a year and remain consistent. And this is true to every year in August for November. So total liabilities decreased $310,000 due to a decrease in the New York State pension line. Any questions on that? No. Moving on to net assets, capital assets increased due to septic work at the Barron's house and Tell Me a Story exhibit. Reserved assets remained unchanged, and unreserved assets increased $451,000, giving us an increase of total net assets of $514,000 to do a positive NOI of $181,000 and an increase in investments of $333,000. Any questions on that? It's all good stuff. All good. On to investments. The reserve fund had a slightly negative performance as of January of 0.0084%. And both the Discovery Center endowment and endowment have a positive performance of 12.17 and 12.45 gain as of January. And this is just due to a very positive equity market. So overall, investments a positive performance and a gain of $333,000. Any questions?
Is the reserve fund just invested in something really conservative so we can have access to it when we need those?
Yes, it's a fixed income, 99% fixed income, 1% cash equivalent. And that's where we put our excess money.
Steve, if you have specific questions too, because KeyBank is here today for their presentation, you can ask them specifically to point it out in that booklet.
No more questions? Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Action items.
Moving on to action items. First item is to consider updating the purchasing and procurement guidelines.
Okay. So in your packet, you have the red line version, so you can see the changes that were made, and then a final version. Purchasing and procurement guidelines are a requirement under the Public Authorities Law, and we originally adopted them when we were identified as a public authority by the Comptroller's Office several years ago. And I realized that the board needs to approve them on an annual basis. So I reviewed them again, and then I thought it would be prudent to go to one of our law firms that we've been working with to go through it. So they did, and that's what all the red line is. All the red line is it's basically wordsmithing. Instead of using the word state, it's New York State. So the only real substantive thing that changed is for any expenses, vendor contracts specifically of $50,000 or more. Those are the ones that we go out to bid for more or less. We put them in the contract reporter. It used to require sealed bids. That's not in the law anyplace. It's kind of like an old thing, prior to electronic transfer of things. So they suggested that it's up to us to keep it, but they would recommend not. So that's why it's removed. We still can, but it's not really needed for it. So those are the updates for that. So you will see this going forward now every March. I'll put this in front of the board. The expectation not with any changes unless something comes down from changes in the Public Authorities Law.
Now, is this something we didn't know about, or is this something that they've changed where we have to do it annually?
No, it's not. It's something that we should have been doing annually and was pointed out. So I said, well, now we're going to do it. So yes, and obviously nothing changed from the time when we first adopted it, which would be, I should know off the top of my head, 2012. I think it was 12, right? Yeah. Right. So we adopted them March 14th, 2012. So that's when we went through the whole process of adopting all these requirements as an authority, and then we amended it the 21st. Yeah, they were amended in 16.
So not that late.
No, not. But we're going forward. We'll do it every year, obviously. Make sure we're in compliance. Any questions? Just primarily administrative. So, is there a motion for that?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Don. Just a second. Second. Any questions? Comments? All in favor? Aye. Great, thank you.
Okay, the second action item is we have an opening in the audit committee with the retirement of Mike Lyons. And I would like to appoint Nancy Pearson to replace Mike as a member of the audit committee. So, ask for a motion for that?
Yep. Yeah, so simply the bylaws require the board to put forward the appointment, and then the board considers and approves it. And Nancy, you can't vote,
Somebody else wants to
as you know.
raise a hand. Okay.
As you can see, Nancy really wants this position.
I want to be generous to the rest of the board.
So can I have a motion? Second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard, Nancy.
Thank you.
And we look forward to your participation in the audit committee.
Yes, thanks, Lee.
Okay, so we will move to presentations. The first one is, you're going to do the,
Let me do the intro,
okay.
because there's a change on your agenda. Cycle Architecture was going to be here, but is not able to make it. So
So you get me.
So we have Aaron, our Director of Education Programs, who is working on the committee with Blake Etchison, Casey Etchison. So Aaron's going to give you basically an overview of the project and where we're going from here, once the projectors warm up.
Yes.
And that's okay, because we're
Way ahead of schedule.
way ahead of schedule, and I told KeyBank we won't go on any earlier than 10:15. Sorry, Peter.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm going to give you a quick update on an interdepartmental project we've been working on here, which is planning for improvements to the Discovery Center grounds. So we'll look at a few slides, and I'll just take you through the process and what we've been up to so far. So the grounds of the Discovery Center represent a lot of opportunities and challenges to us right now. Over time, since phase 3 of the Discovery Center was completed, which was the grounds phase of the Discovery Center, we've had a lot of ideas shared with us about different improvements we could make. So some of the questions that have been addressed to Blake and I are listed up here, and they include: how can we better address the maintenance of the grounds? How can we better utilize the grounds for interpreting the pine bush? How can we provide habitat for wildlife and improve opportunities for people to view wildlife near the Discovery Center? Also included with that have been some suggestions for how do we better utilize exhibits. So some of the exhibits on the grounds are being used, but maybe not to their full extent or not to what we had initially intended. So here's a couple of examples of some exhibits that we've been thinking about. How could we do this better? How could we interpret this concept better, as we've had over 10 years to take a look and watch and see how people are utilizing these different exhibits on the grounds. Also the facade and the entryway. So again, a lot of people have expressed, what else can we do with the facade? We've used banners, but is there something else we can do to make the entryway to the Discovery Center more inspiring, more attractive to people? Also the grounds, the signage. So all those things we're thinking about as well. Certainly maintenance of the grounds, a little bit hard to see in this picture, but it shows really tall grass. The grass is lovely and beautiful, but it does cause some challenges for maintenance, especially with walkways. So that's another thing that we address each year. Also, access to different features on the grounds and just people maybe not aware of certain things. How can we make things more visible and prominent? I put the bike rack in here. The bike rack is beautiful, it's great, but it's tucked behind the building. Not a lot of people see it, and therefore maybe it's not utilized as well as it could be. So is there something we could do with that? And certainly some structural issues that pop up from time to time, drainage being one of them. So there's a lot of different things that we've been thinking about, and we were kind of thinking of them in isolation, like, oh, we've got this problem, we need to be mowing over here, we've got this issue, we've got this opportunity. But then we stepped back and we thought, why don't we look at this holistically? Why don't we take a comprehensive look at the grounds? This really should be a unified project that we're taking each one of these different challenges or opportunities and thinking of them in the big picture. So we formed a grounds committee made up of commission staff, so Blake, Wendy, Neil, Jesse, and myself. So we represented diversity of backgrounds on the staff, so science, stewardship, communications, education, facility, and more. And our goal is to create and implement a vision and plan for the Discovery Center grounds that will embrace these opportunities and also address the challenges that I just mentioned. So we began with gathering input from staff, and we had a staff charrette in 2016. We also hosted a public charrette and asked for public feedback in the survey. We'd also like to, at this point, extend an invitation to the commission board for 1 to 2 volunteers to join our grounds committee and help us with the planning phase that we're in right now. We'd love to have your input. So the goals, we took all the input that we had collected and we distilled it down to some goals. Our major goals are to create an entry experience that welcomes, inspires, informs, is safe, and comforts visitors. We want to enhance the ecology and showcase the best of the Inland Pine Barrens. And we want to honor our brand. We want people to say, wow, this is amazing when they come in, not, is this abandoned? Should I be here? So we really want people to feel inspired when they come in and feel engaged right as they enter. So we decided, well, we've got lots of great ideas here. We came up with a vision for what we'd like to see on the grounds. We have our goals, but we also recognize that we really need some expert advice. There are people that can help us with this, including architects, landscape architects, engineers, etc., exhibit designers that could help us with a plan for the grounds. So we decided we would like to have a conceptual plan for the redesign of the Discovery Center grounds. So we released an RFP in January. Proposals were due January 22nd. The verbiage up here just outlines gives a little bit of background on what was in the RFP, what specifically we were looking for from a consultant. We conducted interviews in early February and we selected a team in mid-February. And the team we selected is led by Cycle Architecture and Planning. So they're an architectural firm in Brooklyn, New York. And they put together a team of different consultants, one being MOE, which is an exhibit design team. They're actually doing our Tell Me a Story exhibit, which will be installed very soon. They also had Stephen Stimson, which they're a landscape architecture firm in Massachusetts, and Floyd Albert, who they have multiple offices. They're an engineering firm. They do have an office here in Albany. So we selected them based on their combination of technical expertise and creativity. Also, their willingness to listen to us before suggesting anything. They really want to get to know what we do here, understand what we do, why we do it, what the Inland Pine Barrens is all about, what our concerns and issues are, and what are our opportunities. Also, they met our price goal and they met our MWBE goals. Here's just some photos that show some of their representative work. So this is from Cycle. They worked on a master plan for a school in Nepal. Actually, the school was destroyed in the earthquakes in 2015. And so they put together a really interesting plan for a school. They also do a lot of work in Brooklyn. This is a reuse of some warehouses. They redesigned it to commercial use in Brooklyn. This is an example of MOE's work. If any of you have been up to Thatcher Park, their new visitor center, MOE did their exhibits. So this is the bat cave that they designed. And Stephen Stimson has done work with native species and showcasing native species. These are a couple of projects that were done in Massachusetts. This is the International Fund for Animal Welfare, I believe. And this is a park in Sandwich, Massachusetts, where they incorporated a water feature. So they've done some really interesting artistic work that ties in closely with native habitats. So our timeline right now, we've already accomplished a couple of things on the list here. We've met with the team, the consulting team, to review existing conditions and documentation. They're getting a handle on our vision, understanding what we're looking for. Our first deliverable is later this month. They'll be coming up with 3 preliminary designs for us to consider for the grounds. And then we'll be selecting one of those, and then they'll be, based on feedback from us, working to develop that into the conceptual plan for the grounds for the Discovery Center. And this is the phase where, again, we could really use 1 or 2 board members who might be interested in volunteering for the committee to have your input in the process. And the final plan submission is anticipated in mid-May, and they will be presenting to the commission at the June meeting. So everybody will get a chance to see the conceptual plan at that time. Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
So are you looking to, like, redo everything? I mean, open to redoing the whole look? Is that it, or are you focusing on, let's try to make what we have work?
It's open for discussion at this point. We're looking for ideas. We've come up with some different ideas within the team, but some of the major goals are to work on the facade of the building, to work with the exhibits on the grounds to see, is there a better way that we could interpret different messages? How do we better connect and inspire people? So the 3 different plans that we are looking for, the real general concepts, are kind of like a pie in the sky, a middle ground, and then a very conservative one. So of those 3, we'd be considering one of those, and then once we select that, further developing that plan. Yes, Don?
Is there a line item in the upcoming budget?
Yes, so it is funded, so we have funding in this fiscal year as well as next fiscal year, so it'll be a phased as far as the deliverables. So their proposal was for $49,900.
That's just for the design. I'm talking about for the...
Oh, for the work. So we need to have the plan to be able to, part of the plan is to develop a cost estimate. So we don't know what that's going to be at this time, but then we would be working towards...
So we're probably looking 1 fiscal year out for the execution of capital projects?
Potentially. That kind of brings up the point of the conversation that we had in the audit committee, and looking at, we have this reserve fund, and I actually thought about bringing this to the board at this meeting. We don't really have any definition of how we would expend those reserve funds. And it's always been implied that that reserve fund is just that. If we need to expend in an emergency situation for operations, if our funding gets cut, we don't have it. Or for capital expenses, something very significant, fixed assets, something like that, or other capital improvements like when we did the boiler. We had the actual funds to do that, but that would fit too. Or land. We've talked a lot about land. So that's a proposal I'm going to put forth in June. I don't like to come up with resolutions prior to posting before a meeting, but we'll talk about that specifically in the June meeting for that funding. And I'm looking at that because that reserve account, we've been able, it's growing because it's generating quite a bit of interest, which is great, but it's time to use some of that funding for some specific things, and this is a perfect example of that. So we've got a plan, not to take your whole presentation away.
It's fine.
So we have a plan, we have this plan, and then we're going to need design documents. So that's going to be phase 2. Design documents are the technical documents, and there's going to be expense associated with that. Then there's actual fabrication and construction. So all that'll come to the board, and that'll be outside of the operating budget. We're going to have that specifically as a capital separate, and I'll propose that each time when we get the numbers from the consultants.
Does the commission
commission or the audit committee have a set amount that, a goal for the reserve fund as far as, percentage of the budget that they want to maintain, and then a goal for spending down anything excess of that, and how that should be targeted?
We don't have a percentage. I mean, I'll make that recommendation in June when we have the conversation at the audit committee prior to the meeting in June. I don't want to speak out of turn without talking to the audit committee. But my thought is, we would probably, we want to maintain a certain balance in that, particularly for, if it's there for emergency operations, right? That's what we need it for. But what that balance is, it's probably a third of what we've got. I'm going to guess, maybe, or 50%.
So some guideposts around what that fund should look like, and then also some kind of guidance on the types of things that we should be activating it for.
Just very
when
specific
it
ones,
goes beyond that amount, could really help, the board and the staff think about, how to actively manage that and invest it in appropriate projects, maybe a little bit more aggressively.
Yep, good point.
Are you considering integrating that with what's going on inside? And I'm thinking, specifically about the Tell Me a Story exhibit that we're trying to put in here.
Yes, so there definitely would be connection between the exhibits inside and outside. We would probably want there to be that type of continuity. And also, we've talked about different ideas as far as research goes, highlighting research and maybe better accommodating research projects like the bird banding station and things like that. So there's a lot of ideas out there that are feeding into this.
Chris?
Yeah, does it make sense to give the design team some parameters in terms of sort of a budget to sort of say, here's a range we'd like you to design within, and here's sort of an annual maintenance budget. We want to make sure that whatever is designed is not, killing the commission, in terms of trying to maintain it. So that's what we do in the city of Albany.
Yeah.
Is try to do that, because otherwise it's pretty open-ended.
Well, that's what's gonna. You can go ahead. I mean, that's what they're doing. They're gonna
And that's
look at phasing.
And and that's the whole idea behind the 3 different ideas, and looking specifically in terms of budget. What can we afford to build and maintain in the long term? So that was the idea of but there could be. I'm sorry, Chris.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say there could be ideas that come out in that pie in the sky that maybe some element of it could be incorporated into another one that we like. We didn't want to restrict it right off the bat because we wanted to allow there to be some creativity, but certainly that is a big consideration.
And recognizing that phasing is probably going to be the only way we're going to be able to do that. And there's some things that probably will not be able to get done, or at least for a while. Point, Chris. Okay?
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mike's not here, is he? You know what we can do? We have a real short executive session. We can move into executive session because I want to talk to you about some real property negotiations that are happening. And then we can come back into regular session. He will be here by then. We can do that and we'll still end early. Does that make sense?
Great.
Okay. Can we have a motion to go into executive session, out of regular into executive?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, next we have Mike Duran presenting from KeyBank.
And Peter Moran.
And Peter Moran.
Hey, Peter. Are we here? Just
Sure, that's good.
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and thank you. My name is Peter Marici from Key Private Bank, here with my colleague Mike Duran. Hello, everyone. Portfolio manager. Let me start out by saying thank you all for allowing us to continue to work with the Albany Pine Bush. What we're going to present this morning is the result as of the end of December 2017. So if you have any questions as we go through it, please feel free to ask us. If you have any questions before, if there's anything on the top of your mind, but before we start, by all means, feel free to ask that as well.
Doesn't mean mentally giving Peter this is a stretch while I get there. Good morning, everyone. As Chris had mentioned, we're here to kind of give an update on the overall relationship and the investment relationship with Albany Pine Bush. For those who've been here before for our little talk, I'm going to keep it brief, but keep it kind of big picture. picture overview, but if there's anything specific we want to cover, feel free to ask a question about anything in the portfolio, anything market outlook related, etc. So we're at your disposal for that. Before I get into any of the investments, I always like to point out the terms of compliance, right? So the Pine Bush relationship with Key is very important to us, and one of the critical components is having a proper instructional tool within the Albany Pine Bush relationship to show us sort of our direction. That's referred to as an investment policy statement. And it really maps out the guidelines for an investment manager to follow on behalf of the institution. As I mentioned in the past, the current investment policy statement is updated. It is appropriate, and all of the holdings and all of the notes and investments within the portfolios herein are within the guidelines of the investment policy statement. So a lot of times it's just restrictions on what types of securities, asset allocation ranges, etc. But as of right now, as of today in this meeting, everything is in line. So you can check that off from a fiduciary standpoint. The board does a great job, and the Finance Committee does a great job of kind of overseeing that for us. Within the deck, I've got 3 portfolios. There's the overall endowment, there is the reserve account, and the Discovery Center managed account. Each of the relationships, each of the portfolios is under the investment objective of what is considered a balanced objective. So if you think of balance as being even, 50-50, that would be the neutral breakdown of stocks and bonds. As of right now, the KPB, the Key Private Bank thought process on the markets is we do like equities, even with February, even though February was a bad month, but we're still doing fine. We still like equities better than fixed income. So there's going to be a slight overweight to equities within each portfolio, and there's going to be a slight underweight, because that money has to come from somewhere, on the fixed income side. So instead of it being 50-50, they're much closer to, say, a 53%, 54%, 55% equity weighting, and that commensurate downswing on the fixed income side. How has that done for the portfolios historically? It's done pretty well for the longer term. And I would ask anyone with a deck, and this information can be provided, but page 7 is usually the kind of nuts and bolts. Again, I want to keep it kind of high level, but the page people want to know about is what's on page 7 in tab 1. And that's the performance page. Kind of gives you an idea of how things have gone over the last few periods. As I mentioned earlier, each of the 3 portfolios is a balanced objective, so this representation, the numbers you see here, are pretty much in line with the other 2, so we don't necessarily need to go through each of the 3 individually. We'll just stick with the endowment portfolio, which is the largest of the 3 portfolios. Currently, as of the end of the year, was valued at about $3,370,000 or so. So page 7 shows you the performance of the portfolios as of December 31st. We wanted to get a year-end number. And you can see, for those with a deck, the 3-month period, so the 4th quarter of 2017, the overall holdings were up about 3%, 2.9%. And if you go back and look at the 1-year trailing, so that would be all of 2017, the portfolio returned about 12.4%. Going back 3 years on an average or annualized basis, it returned about 6.1%. So as we start to see a little bit of fluctuation of some down periods. But even over the 5 years, the overall return is about 7.7% on an annualized or an average basis. So looking back, the total portfolio for the endowment has returned over the last 5 years about 7.75% each year. The key to investing in any of our investments, but really the key to this strategy is that the Finance Committee does a great job remembering that these are not individual people's assets, right? This is a collective group portfolio. So the thinking that goes into it and the strategies, while the big picture might be the same, there are some nuances. And you don't want to think of it in terms of what do I own in my portfolio versus what's owned here. That can be difficult sometimes, because a lot of times when we're talking with folks who serve on committees or on boards, sometimes it's easy to confuse what's here with what you're doing. And the risk component is important, because these are assets that we need to protect for the longer term, not just for an individual. At the Finance Committee meeting, I handed out a a quick asset class sheet, and I'm not one for a lot of handouts. I don't know why, but for those of you who haven't seen that, you can hand it out. And the reason I wanted to hand this out, and I can sort of flash it to the group at large and you can get an idea, but this is a chart for the previous 10 years historically of all the different asset groups in the market. So think of it this way. This is a calendar, it's a sort of a schedule that shows different colors for different asset groups. So each of these colors in a column represents things like fixed income, mid-cap, small cap, international developed, etc. One of the things that Key Private Bank talks to a lot of endowments, foundations, institutions about is maintaining that discipline and that risk metric to say, the goal, what is the goal here of these assets? And it's not necessarily to triple or double the portfolio, it's to protect them, but still participate in the market. So from a risk standpoint, when you take each of these individually, and if you look, there's different colors going up and down each column, it sorts them by performance. So the top ranking color would be the top performing asset group that year, and the bottom one would be the worst performing asset group that year. Not necessarily saying that this number is better than this one, but the reason I wanted to point this out to the group and to show them about the idea of risk is, if you just take a look, you can see that the red box is always in the center of the page. For those with red-green color blindness, some of my family has that, I apologize. But if you look, the red box is always in the center of the page. And that's the balanced portfolio. And what that's made up of is all of the other groups. The reason behind this is sometimes you'll have certain groups that are the best performer, and the following year they're the worst performer. And that happened in 2008, 2009, 2014. You never can tell year to year what's going to be the best performer. But you can pretty much predict that if you combine them all together, you reduce the overall risk of the portfolio, you're going to be in that middle section. You're never going to be too high, you're never going to be too low, but from a risk standpoint, it's always going to perform in that middle group. And that's demonstrated, again, by that red box, that red group, which is a balanced portfolio. When we talk about investment objectives for the endowment, for the reserve, and for the Discovery Center, we want to keep in mind that these aren't our assets. You shouldn't be shooting for the moon. We also don't want to maintain purely cash so that you're not performing. Having that responsible allocation in the middle is the best way to go, and it's proven over time. That's the allocation for each of the three portfolios. So when we look at, for example, a balanced portfolio in 2008, we all remember, most of us remember 2008 and investments in the markets, a very tough year overall. Even the balanced portfolio was down 20% that year. However, the worst performing group was international emerging, down over 50%, and the best performing was fixed income, only up 5%. Fast forward to last year, and we had international emerging last year was up 35%, and you had the worst performing, which was cash, at only 0.8. So you'd look at that and think, well, why would I want to own cash last year? I should have owned all international. And then you'd look back at the next year and say, well, if I switch everything to international and I have that negative 53% year, I'm undoing all of the hard work that went into building these assets. So the idea is when you have up years, don't think it's always going to be that way. When you have down years, don't think it's always going to be that way. And maintaining that middle ground, that balanced portfolio, is really a solid way to go from a fiduciary standpoint and also from a personal standpoint. It's easy to get lost in a lot of the details and the numbers. But my overall perspective on the portfolio is proper investment objective, really good asset allocation. The investment policy statement is clear, concise, and it gives us instructions on how to do our duties. And from the Finance Committee side, I think from a fiduciary standpoint, they're doing a great job making sure that we're doing what we need to be doing and that the assets are doing what they need to be doing. So I know that was a mouthful. Again, I want to be respectful of time and not keep everyone here longer. But anybody has any thoughts or comments or questions, I'd be happy to take them about anything. Well, portfolio.
Steve, did you want to ask any questions?
Okay, if any come up in the future, we're on, please feel free to reach out through Chris or let us know if we can help in any way. But thanks for having us today, and we very much appreciate your relationship.
Really appreciate your business. Our contact information is on the front, so if you have any questions after this, feel free to give me a call or send an email, or Mike an email or a call. But thank you very much for working with us. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, and we appreciate your help too. Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
That's what I said. I'm like, I'm sticking with orange. Just as good. Yeah.
All right, before we adjourn today, at the risk of violating Robert's Rules of Order, I have an important announcement to make. Today is Chris Halver's 25th anniversary. Knowing how much Chris appreciates the attention of individual accolades, I felt compelled to make that announcement today.
I thought I got away with it.
And furthermore, staff has gotten together and asked me to present this plaque to commemorate this significant milestone of 25 years. And I would say furthermore that it's more than just a chronological 25 years. Everybody in this room and many people outside this room know that you run a first-rate organization. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but under your direction, you have many talented and dedicated staff, and I think this plaque represents their appreciation to you to provide them a working environment which allows them to flourish and do what they love to do. So it's not just 25 years, it's 25 outstanding years.
Thanks. So those of you who know me well, particularly staff who worked with me for a long, long time, you know how I like public recognition. You know how I like things like that. So, what would I say? I guess I never thought that I would be working at the same organization 25 years from when I started on March 15th, 1993, when I was called at home and said, don't come in, because we had 25 inches of snow that day.
Wow.
We had the same storm last year in March, 25 inches. And I never thought that I would leave the science field that I was so passionate about when I went to school. If you don't know my background, I have a bachelor's in environmental science with a focus in ecology, and my master's focuses on ecology, specifically fire ecology. So my passion was always science, particularly plants, plant ecology. I learned quickly after doing a research project between my junior and senior year as an undergrad, tracking raccoons, that wildlife, forget it. It moves. Plants don't move. But I really like plants. So that was kind of my focus, and then I moved into, primarily because of my graduate and undergraduate professor, an interest in fire ecology. And when I started here, in '93, I was hired in an 8-week position as a prescribed burn crew member for 8 weeks. And then I moved from that position into a multitude of other science positions. And when the executive director who preceded me left in June of 2000, I was quickly forced into the role as acting executive director. Not something I had any interest in doing. But after a lot of soul searching and thinking and talking to a lot of colleagues that I'd met in the past, I decided to apply. And I was, after waiting, I don't know, 6 months for the appointments office to go through my background, I was cleared to be offered the position, and I'm grateful for it. And as one of the former board members said back then, we took a real gamble on Chris, but he worked out all right. So I hope I continue to work out okay. I don't think I've got another 25 in me, but I've got quite a few more, so as long as you have me. So thanks.